Hi, it's Tash from Tash's Library. Today's video is going to be my July wrap-up. A little bit late, but you know what? I've been busy. July was a way better month than I'd had in May and June, and I ended up reading 8 books, although one of them was an audiobook. Now, I thought this month I might not actually rank them in order. I thought I might just look at the prompts that I got, look at the books that I read for them and give you my thoughts, and then look at some of the books that I added to my TBR. So one of the prompts I had was random number, and for that one I had to go to my Excel spreadsheet, use a random number generator, and I ended up pulling the Maleficent 7 by Cameron Johnson. This one was on my Kindle, and it's a fantasy standalone that I end up giving 4 stars to. The synopsis for this is a demonologist general brings an old army back together to protect this town that is being conquered by a new evil empire. So what could go wrong though when you bring together a demonologist, a necromancer, an orc warrior, a vampire, a demigod, a pirate queen, and a twisted alchemist? The answer is everything. This was very enjoyable. What I didn't like about it was that it was pretty gory. So if you don't like your fantasy dark, I would steer away from that one. And there was a lot of battle prep. So I felt that there was a lot of time just building up defenses. But what I really liked about this book were really fascinating characters. Absolutely loved the vampire character and the orc character. They were just really nuanced and very noble and moral, and I really liked that. I loved the great use of humor throughout. It did not fall flat. It was very well done, very well integrated, and it just had great twists and was very engaging all the way through. I loved that all the characters were a little bit morally grey. And basically, I would recommend this book to any lovers of grimdark fantasy with a comedic bent, and anyone who enjoys military fantasies as well. For the prompt mythological creatures, I ended up reading Shanghai Immortal by A.Y. Chow. This is a 2023 fantasy release, and I believe it's a debut novel. This I gave 3 stars to. Now the synopsis for this is you follow Lady Jing, who's half vampire and half fox spirit, and as the ward of the boss of the Shanghai underworld, she has spent the past sort of 90 years running errands, trying to control her explosive temper and avoiding her enemies at court. But when she overhears courtiers plotting to steal a priceless dragon pearl, she seizes her chance to expose them once and for all. Now, what didn't I like about this book? Well, Jing was very whingy, very immature, and I know time doesn't pass in quite the same way in the underworld as it does above ground. But at 90, she's still supposed to be a little bit more mature. She's come of age, and she just really acts like a petulant 5-year-old some of the times. Also, there was really no character development in my mind. The pacing was off. There was, for example, a page spent on how much she likes caramels, but then significant plot points are glossed over in a sentence. And some things are just left unexplained. But what was most jarring for me was the use of modern slang in what is supposed to be a novel set in Jazz Age Shanghai. This was very anachronistic and did not work for me. And, words like taters, I just got so sick of reading that. So it reads very young, and it was just a bit jarring in my opinion. What I did like, however, was the juxtaposition of real and underworld Shanghai. The world building was beautiful in a lot of ways. The Chinese mythology that was integrated was fascinating, and the plot was really promising. It was an intriguing idea. So I would recommend these for those who enjoy sassy characters who read quite young, and of course lovers of Asian mythology. For the prompt punctuation, I read the third novel in the Remembrance of Earth's Past series, and that's Death's End by Cixin Liu. This is a science fiction trilogy that I absolutely adored. I loved book one, loved book two even more, and I really enjoyed book three, even though not as much as book two. This was a 5-star read for me, and it's really the whole trilogy follows this sweeping history that begins with a government project during the Cultural Revolution in China, where they are sending messages to the stars, and everything goes very wrong as they're finding that prominent scientists then start dying. I'm not going to tell you more because it's a fascinating, intriguing read. Now, if I had to find a flaw in this novel, it's that the ending didn't quite go in the direction that I would have liked. But overall, this was great, hard sci-fi with a very cool interplay of the possible and impossible in physics. The plot was just sweeping and epic and just super twisty, and you just didn't know what was going to happen next. And this particular book does introduce some great new characters as well. Having said that, this is not a character-driven series at all. It is very plot-driven. It's very ideas-driven. So if you really just love sitting intimately with one or two characters, then this is probably not the series for you. However, I would recommend this to any lovers of hard sci-fi and first contact novels. So for Hazard Map, I ended up reading the second part of Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. I did start reading A Song of Ice and Fire last year. I know I was very late on the bandwagon, and I absolutely loved the first couple books. And so I was really keen to continue with it. This I ended up giving 5 stars to. I probably don't need to say much about A Song of Ice and Fire, but it pretty much just covers feuding families who fight for control of the throne. Now, what I didn't like about this particular book was the outcome for some characters, and that's obviously no flaw in the book. It is actually part of what makes it amazing, because you really don't know what's going to happen to any of your characters, and sometimes really bad things happen to characters you really like. What I loved about this is the unpredictability, the writing. It just so readable that even though they're quite chunky books, they read so quickly because the writing is so beautiful. The character development over time is fabulous. There's a lot of grey morality, but there are also redemption arcs. There is real change of attitude for a lot of characters, and the pacing is incredible. And I would completely recommend this for lovers of political fantasy, epic stories with lots of characters, and those seeking a fantasy on the darker side. Now, because I love this, I actually ended up continuing, and I just felt like continuing the next book, and I ended up reading A Feast for Crows as well. Now, this I only gave 4 stars to. I did not like it as much as the first 3 novels in this series. This one, in my opinion, was very low on action, and it was just less engaging, and I really struggled to get through some of the chapters, and I felt myself putting it down and kind of not wanting to pick it up sometimes, even though when I did pick it up, I did quite enjoy it. Once again, though, it still has the unpredictability and twists and great character developments, so definitely don't let this put you off. After all, I'd still gave it 4 stars. For Random Shelf, it didn't give me a lot of choice, and I ended up reading Streams of Silver, which is the 5th installment in the Legend of Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore. This is a fairly large fantasy series that follows a dark elf called Drizzt, who basically lives in this dark underworld where families are highly competitive, morals are lacking, and he starts to question the morality of his society and the aims of his family, and make some decisions to walk away from that. This is just a wonderful series. I love the writing so much, and I ended up giving this particular installment 4 stars. Now, what brought it down for me in this case is a lot of sitting and walking around in this one. And there isn't really much character development, which is okay. I mean, I still really enjoy sitting with these characters, and Drizzt is one of my all-time favorite characters, so that's okay. But it did bring it down slightly, and I had given the other installments 5 stars, I believe. Now, what I really liked about this was, of course, Drizzt. I love Drizzt. But the supporting characters are really good too. There's some really cool characters that you really enjoy getting to know. And the plot's engaging. There's a very cool storyline going on here. And so I'd recommend this for any lovers of traditional quest fantasies, D&D style fantasies. For author photo, I ended up picking Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, because there is a photo of the author on the back and inside as well. This is a middle grade fantasy novel, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. It follows Amari, who believes her missing older brother Quentin is alive despite all evidence to the contrary. So when she discovers a ticking briefcase in his closet, which contains a nomination for a summer tryout at the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs, she's certain that this holds the key to locating him. She has to come to terms with, however, is this world containing magicians and fairies and aliens and other supernatural creatures, while she's also competing for a spot against all these kids who've known about magic their whole lives. There was nothing in this book I didn't like. This was an absolute joy to read from cover to cover, and I cannot recommend it enough. The characters are so delightful. There's a wonderful interplay between the real and magical worlds. The magic system is so well thought out, and I would recommend this to any lovers of magical school settings, and also those who have enjoyed novels like The Marvelers or Onyeka and the Academy of the Sun. Wonderful. So not for a prompt, but I did read a book on audiobook, and this was the sequel to In the Glass Library series by C.J. Archer. The title was The Medici Manuscript. Now, this is a sort of fantasy mystery hybrid, and I ended up giving it 2 stars, I'm afraid to say. It follows the first book, which is The Librarian of Crooked Lane, where Sylvia continues to kind of work with this wealthy heir, and this time to investigate a mysterious book. Now, what I liked about this book was the great premise. It had such promise for a really cool magic, and the supporting characters are fabulous in this. What I didn't like, however, were the plot conveniences. They just did not make sense. There's a real lack of tension and mystery for what should be very mysterious, where you've got this mystery novel with fantasy elements. And I also found that even though the supporting characters were great, the main characters really have no development, and it feels like you don't really quite get to know them. They sort of kept at arm's length from the reader. And so I don't know if I'm going to continue this series. The 3rd book's not out yet, and I'm intrigued by the premise of where the plot is potentially leading, but I didn't love the execution. However, I would recommend this for anyone who quite likes those kind of low stakes mystery fantasy hybrids. And the audio narrator was good, I have to say that. Ending on a high note is another book that I read that was not based on a prompt, and this is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which is a horror novella standalone. I read this on my Kindle and I gave it 5 stars. It is a retelling of The House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. It follows Alex, a soldier who pays a visit to an unwell friend in the House of Usher, finding that all is not as it seems. What I didn't like about this book? Absolutely nothing. It was perfect. I enjoyed every second of it. The supporting characters were delightful. There's a sort of botanist character I adored. The sense of uneasiness was so masterfully executed throughout this story, where you're just uncomfortable the whole time and you're expecting something really bad to happen all the time, which to me is just perfect for this kind of story. And that's exactly what The House of Usher does. And the way she did this in such a different way, in such a different context, and still maintain that level of unease was just so amazing. I cannot say enough about it. I loved the gradual unveiling of the truth. The use of pronouns was great too. Very, very cool, inventive use of different pronouns for soldiers, for example, particularly these female soldiers women who join the army, and then once they're soldiers, they actually earn their own pronouns, I thought was just such a cool idea. And overall, this novella is a perfect length. The pacing is immaculate, and it couldn't have been shorter, couldn't have been longer. It just worked as one perfect little book that I adored reading. I would highly recommend this to any lovers of Edgar Allan Poe and also lovers of old school spooky horror, because this was a really fun read. And that's my July wrap up. They are the books I read. Thank you so much for watching, and until I see you next time, take care.